The Connecticut Sun are 15-4, and the next Connecticut Sun beat writer, Noa Dalzell, is here to talk all about the Sun's season so far, Alyssa Thomas being named to Team USA's 5-on-5 team for the upcoming Olympics, who has stepped up for the team this season, what's ahead for the team, and more. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Tuesday. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 NCAA beats, so get that YouTube subscription up, and you can also support us by subscribing to The Next, $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today we'll be talking about the Sun season so far, who has stepped up for the team this season, what's ahead, and more. Joining me today is Noa Dalzell, who covers the Connecticut Sun for The Next. So thank you for joining me, Noa. And just to start off, the Sun started the season hot, 9-0 to start, but have gone 2-3 over the last 5 games. What's changed for the team?
Yeah, I actually don't know if anything has changed for them. First of all, they had a pretty easy schedule to start. And so I think if you looked at strength of schedule versus the record versus some other teams, like that was a factor. And that's why even when they were 9-0, I think some people weren't taking that record with as much seriousness as maybe they would have had they played the Aces and the Liberty twice, so that's just one thing. But I also feel like they squeezed out some wins where they weren't playing their best. And I actually remember, I think when they were 9-0, Stephanie White said, "We haven't played like a full good game yet." And I thought that's pretty remarkable to be undefeated in the WNBA and your head coach feels like you haven't strung together a good game yet, right? And so they obviously have dropped some as of late. There are things that this team struggles with, and at the top of the list is shooting and free throw shooting and hitting threes at the clip that some other teams are hitting them, and I think that catches up with them at times. But I don't know that I feel like they've been significantly worse in the last few weeks as they were earlier in the season. Like I think some of the challenges maybe came to the surface a little bit more.
And then how did they get back into the win column against Phoenix last night?
Yeah, I thought last night was a great kind of team effort. Ty Harris obviously had that big third quarter, and that was huge and kind of helping them continue to pull away. And then Veronica Burton was an X factor. I wrote about her recently, but I think she hit timely baskets, made big plays. And obviously, it helps that Phoenix was without several kind of key players. But I thought last night was an example of how the Connecticut Sun can kind of get away with not having someone who goes off for 30. I think that's one of the challenges this team has is there isn't that type of player on the team. But there is like well-rounded scoring, and last night was kind of one of those nights where you saw different people step up at different moments.
That's a perfect transition into my next question. Last night they did have 5 players in double figures. They might not have somebody that is a threat to go off for 30 every single night, but how does the number of offensive threats make them a difficult team to go up against?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, you have Alyssa Thomas as kind of like the central hub of the offense, and she's as good of a playmaker as anybody in the league. And she's tough because she's big and strong and versatile. I always think like I can't even imagine what she would be like if she could still shoot the way that she could before her shoulder injuries. But that she's someone that you have to worry about. And then Carrington has taken a massive leap this year. Both she's a threat from the outside, although she hasn't been super reliable, but you definitely don't want to leave her open. And then you also have to worry about her in transition. I mean, she's one of the deadliest players in the league, right? So there's things to worry about with her. Ty Harris, when she's at her best, I think is another threat. So you don't really have anybody that you can leave you can view as not a weapon offensively. I didn't even mention DeWanna Bonner, the team's leading scorer, right? And then Bree Jones, who I think at at pre-injury form was an all-star and one of the best centers in the league. So I think with them is that how do you kind of put it all together and consistently so? And, both Bonner and Carrington are around 42% from the field. And so it's tough when your two leading scorers are kind of hot and cold, because that means that if they're both cold on the same night, all of a sudden you're having a night where you just can't put the ball in the basket, right? But then in those nights like last night where people have it going and you can have one or two people struggle. I say that I also covered the Celtics. It's kind of similar with the Celtics where as long as it's just one or two people that are having an off night, you're fine. It just can't be like four people. And then, that's hard to overcome.
Yeah. And last night, DeWanna Bonner was the only starter that wasn't in double figures. But as you said, they had other people that were able to step up. And you had mentioned that, they hadn't really been doing anything differently in the last few weeks. But is there anything else that they can do or that they need to do to get back to the dominant team that we saw earlier in the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some individual players that can probably step up. Like, I think even though Alyssa Thomas is not a score first player, like, I do think it helps when she's scoring a little bit more than she has been in this most recent stretch, just being an offensive weapon. And she has been facilitating and also turning over the ball a little bit more than historically in her career. So I don't think she's playing like the absolute best basketball for her career. She's still one of the best players in the league, but I think there's room there. And then honestly, like, I feel maybe I don't want to keep harping on the same person, but I do think Veronica Burton coming off the bench has the potential to be significant for this team, because they just struggle to find anybody that can reliably hit open 3-pointers. And she was 2 for 3 last night. It's not an enormous sample size, but she's already showing that she's able to space the floor a little bit more efficiently than some other people on the team have been able to so far. And obviously the goal with Mariah Jefferson was to have someone that could come in off the bench, hit open threes, play good defense. And I think she kind of struggled with injuries from the beginning, never quite got into a good rhythm. And so Burton's kind of stepping into what that role was going to be. So as far as your actual question of like, what can they do to be better? I do think it comes down to individuals kind of finding their rhythm and their shot as individuals. And then obviously that opens up things for everybody collectively. But, DeWanna Bonner's had a bunch of these games where she's like 3 for 12 or, just struggling a bit. And it's hard when your primary scorer is not finding her touch, but it doesn't mean that she's obviously a very important player for this team. I think it's just sometimes that's going to result in a loss against a team that's really hot, right?
And, we've talked a lot about Alyssa Thomas. She's going to the Olympics. What has she meant to the Sun team this season? And what does it mean for her being named to the U.S. Olympic team this season or this year?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was kind of inevitable just because she was maybe the best player in the league last year, or definitely up there. I talked to her about kind of what that decision was like, what that process was like, because she was not a part of USA basketball for most of her career. And then joined USA in, I think, 2022, went overseas for FIBA, had a really good time, excelled there. And now she's kind of a part of the program. But I think historically in her career, she didn't know if her style of basketball would fit in overseas basketball. It would fit with Team USA. She's obviously a very defensive-minded player, and so that's not always the blueprint of USA basketball. And so I think she kind of bought in 2022 and is very excited for the opportunity to be back in 24. And she was kind of saying, like, you grow up, you watch the Olympics, you watch the gymnastics or whatever else it is, and now to actually be donning an Olympics jersey and be heading overseas to do that, I think it's super, super exciting. And she's the engine that makes Connecticut Sun go. We talk about offensively, but also defensively. She kind of anchors a lot of what they're able to do. Her and Nay, I think they're a very tough duo for any offense to have to deal with. And so she, everybody else gets a break. She's going to go overseas and play, but it's just a reminder of how valuable of a player she is, that she is on that Olympics roster. And I think she'll be probably one of the most important players on that roster. She's also kind of a do everything player, and those players tend to be the most important players in Olympics.
That was my next question. Do you have anything to add in terms of what role you expect her to play on such a loaded Team USA Olympic team?
Yeah, I mean, I expect her to be one of the top defenders. And so taking some of those difficult matchups, absolutely. And then she's just kind of a connective piece, right? Like she knows how to make the right pass. She grabs timely offensive rebounds. Like she gets blocks, she gets steals. So I don't think she'll be one of the team's leading scorers because they have plenty of scoring. But I do think she's probably going to be in that 5-man lineup that closes. Like I think that she's going to be on the floor at the end of games. And so, yeah, that would be my expectation. I'm really looking forward to tuning in and kind of seeing how it plays out, because I always think like with Olympics, you have so much talent on a team. How do you figure out how to divide that up? And how do you figure out, what combinations of players are best? And this group is a veteran group, so a lot of them have played together. I talked to Alyssa about this. You mentioned, even though you haven't played together that much, you've also played against each other so much that you really know each other's games. So when you are now in the opportunity to be teammates, like it's not that much of a learning curve because you're so intimately familiar with the scouting reports on one another that it kind of makes it a little bit easier. But I think she'll end up being one of the most important players on this roster.
And coming up next, we'll talk about Ty Harris and DiJonai Carrington's increased role in the Sun this season, Mariah Jefferson's injury, what Veronica Burton is contributing this season, and more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the NBA and NHL playoffs over, we've got fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. There's still a couple of weeks of WNBA games before the All-Star and Olympic break. And not only can you bet on upcoming games like tonight's matchup between the Minnesota Lynx and the New York Liberty, and tonight's matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Las Vegas Aces, but you can also build your own parlay too. It's also not too late to bet on who will earn the number 1 seed, win the championship, MVP, Rookie of the Year, and more. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So we touched on these players in the first segment, but Ty Harris and DiJonai Carrington have both stepped into starting roles this season. Can you talk more about what they've both brought to the team?
Yeah, so I think heading into the season, the Sun obviously lost their starting guards, and there's a question of how are they both going to step up? Neither of them was playing in enormous minutes last year, but both showed flashes of down the road being WNBA starters. And I think Harris averaged like 6 points a game. Carrington averaged like 8. But can you turn those players into double-figure scorers and reliable playmakers and kind of the guards that are going to spearhead this team? And I think on opening night, both of them had really good games. And for people who are not maybe more casual fans who tuned in to see the Caitlin Clark's WNBA debut, they watched DiJonai Carrington have a kind of masterclass performance on both ends. And that game kind of set the tone for her season. She's been night in and night out the best defender on the floor, picking up opposing team stars. I used to play basketball. Sometimes when I watch basketball, I watch through the lens of like, what would it be like if this person guarded me? And like, I would want to go home if DiJonai Carrington guarded me, right? So I think defensively, she's put her fingerprints all over the basketball game. Not, these aren't players you can stop. Like, you can't stop Enrique, right? But you can make her life miserable and you can make all of her looks difficult. And now she's not in a rhythm because she hasn't gotten one open shot this whole game, right? And so that's what great defenders make everything difficult. And I think she's done that. And then offensively, she's also been a threat. And she's been, like, every time we talk to, Stephanie White or one of the players about Carrington, they always say, her responsibility is defense first and foremost. So even if she's 1 for 6 from the field in a night or she's 2 for 10, like, she's a defensive player and like that's what her responsibility is. And if she can lock down opposing stars, like, that's her value. So I almost view like her scoring as a bonus, and she's been the second leading scorer on the team so far this season. And the 3-point shot has come and went. Like, it's not been a consistent thing. But the finishing through contact, she had in that overtime win against the Mystics, she had, I think, the last 10 points for Connecticut. So she's not just a defender. She's also somebody that can put the ball in, drive to the basket and hit shots. And that's going to only get better as she gets more comfortable in this role and as she gets deeper into her career. So I think she's a borderline all-star right now, honestly, and has the potential to be one of the best two-way players in the league at her best. And so I'm really high on her. And I think Ty Harris was going through a little bit of a cold stretch there, but when Ty Harris has it going, like, she looks like one of those stars, right? Like her ability to shoot off the dribble, to hit, open threes. She's also a very versatile scorer. So the two of them, they've both been double-figure scorers this year. I think they've shown that even though it hasn't been all easy or all, there's been obviously obstacles there, that they're WNBA starters, where they're starting guards, and they make up a backcourt that I don't really think is a liability for Connecticut. I think that they're, it's a defensive-minded backcourt, but it's one that, is enough to be 15-4, right?
Definitely. And, you touched on this in the previous segment about Mariah Jefferson's ankle injury. But how has her ankle injury, which she's been on and off the injury report throughout the season, how has it impacted the Sun from the beginning of the season to now?
Yeah. So I think the reality is that Mariah Jefferson is somebody that when she signed, she was traded to Connecticut, she did kind of that initial presser with reporters. And, first of all, it's so exciting to have her back in Connecticut, where she's obviously a 4-time national champion. She was excited by the prospect of helping the team win a WNBA championship, something she's never done before. And then she had a very injury-riddled start to her career after a good rookie season. And then these last few years, she's been pretty healthy. And so the hope and the expectation was that she was going to be able to contribute significant minutes off the bench, to space the floor, to play good defense, like to do, to not just play 3 minutes in a night, where I think that ended up being kind of very common stat lines for her, where sometimes I would have to check, like, is she inactive tonight? Like, we haven't seen her. And then obviously she had this ankle surgery last week. And I don't know if it was something that was limiting her all season. I know she's also had her share of knee problems as well. But she was never able to get in a rhythm of playing, being healthy and being able to play, I think, the role that was envisioned for her, or at least the role that we envisioned for her as people kind of watching the team from afar. And so obviously, they signed Veronica Burton to help to fill what that role was, especially when it became clear that Mariah Jefferson needed surgery. And, I think she's listed as she'll be evaluated in 3 weeks. And then there's obviously the Olympic break. So we definitely won't see her before the Olympic break. The question is, will she be available after? It's hard to say. I don't know the specifics of exactly what she underwent, but I think she's one of those things that the vision for her has never quite come to fruition in Connecticut just yet. It's still very early on. It's possible she comes back and she no longer has to deal with a lot of the kind of inflammation or whatever it was that was bothering her pre-surgery. And then maybe she can fulfill that role. But I think, just looking at her stat lines, like, she never really was able to get comfortable out there from a load standpoint. And
then, you talk about Veronica Burton, and you were raving about her in the last segment and her impact. I think it was 11 points yesterday. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what has she been able to contribute to the Sun in her short time in Connecticut so far?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, she fits into the culture. This is a defensive-minded organization, has been for a while, and she's a defensive-minded player. And when I interviewed her last week, I actually told her, so she played at Newton South, right outside of Boston. I played in Brookline, and she was a couple years younger than me, but I remember people talking about her. She played at some of the same tournaments as me. I remember people talking about her as, like, she was a prolific scorer, like she could score on all levels. And, obviously she was in high school then, so the competition was a little bit lower. But when she went to Northwestern, like, she was known as a defensive, beast, really. Like, she was one of the best defenders in the country. And she was someone that was versatile and also somebody that could stop scores. And that's what we've seen from her so far. She's both been efficient offensively, especially in these games where she's played double-digit minutes, because it's really so hard to evaluate anybody when they're playing 3 minutes a night and they're taking one shot. But she's now strung together a series of games where she's playing, 17, 22 minutes. And when she comes in, she sometimes provides the team a boost offensively because she has been able to hit open shots that have been hard to come by. But defensively, I think she's just been instrumental for this group. And so to have somebody that can come off the bench that can score and that is a defensive plus, a defensive positive on a Sun team where everybody's seemingly a really good defender, right? That's kind of almost a prerequisite to playing for this organization. She's been a very positive surprise, and I also think she's a reminder to people that really, really good players get waived, and they might be enormous contributors for another organization the next week, right? That's kind of the nature of the W. And so she's a perfect example of that. Didn't have a role, was waived, and now she's, playing on a contender and playing 22 minutes a night, right?
Yeah, and I can't wait to see, what else you're writing about her. I assume there's more coming if she continues to play like that. Coming up next, we'll chat about what's ahead for the Sun and more. So as the season continues, I know we're right around the halfway mark. What are the expectations surrounding the Sun, and what do they need to do to get there?
Yeah, so the reality is I think this team wants a championship, right? They've come close many times. They're a veteran group, so this is the time to do it, right? Like you have DeWanna Bonner, who she's 37 now, 36. Players that are in their prime, past their prime, and they want to get it done. And for the last couple of years, it seems like the Liberty and the Aces are the two teams that they're just kind of unable to get over the hump with. And so anytime they face the Liberty or the Aces, to me, that is like a circle your calendar matchup, because you want to figure out how they can match up against those teams, because it's great to be 9-0 when you're playing everybody else. But to win a championship, you're probably going to have to beat one or both of those teams. And obviously the Aces started a little slow this season, but have since turned it around. And I would guess we'll they'll be in the finals, although you just never know. But that's the question for me, is like, how do they compete with the leading championship contenders? Are they able to string together wins against the Liberty and the Aces? And so far this season, they're 0-2 against those teams. That's not an enormous sample size, but I also think that you want to see them rattle off a few wins here. And there's things to exploit. Like, I don't think either of those teams are perfect. I think they each have their own flaws and holes. And Connecticut has unique advantages, and they have had the best defense in the league for the most part. And so defensively, I have a lot of faith in them. It's just, can you find enough offense when people are kind of losing their rhythm a bit? Because you can't go into a series and have, Carrington's off and Bonner's off and Alyssa Thomas is taking 7 shots. Like, where are you finding your offense, right? And can you hit your free throws? Because I feel like there have been so many games this year where they're, it's like 6 consecutive free throw misses. They're the worst free throw shooting team in the league. And in the playoffs, that stuff matters too, right? They've joked about it post-game, but it is serious, right? To be able to kind of turn things around in that regard. So to me, the offense is always going to be more of a question than the defense. And that's the reality with this team. But if you can, I think you can gain a lot of confidence as a Sun fan and as a Sun player if you're able to string together some wins against the league's most formidable matchups.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Aces. I'll have the Aces beat writer Matthew Walter on tomorrow. Just a quick plug for the listeners. Come back tomorrow if you want to know more about the Aces. But looking ahead for the Sun, are there any players you think are poised for a breakout?
Yeah, let me think. I don't know. I think DeWanna Bonner is going to catch a better rhythm. She's something like 26% from 3 so far this year. That's a little low for her. Like, she's been historically a good shooter. And I think she's getting good looks, honestly. I don't think that it's anything that is wrong with the attempts she's getting. I don't think sometimes she seems a little bit rushed. Like, I think some of her misses you can attribute to that, but for the most part, like, she is just not having a great shooting season so far. She was 33% her previous 2 seasons in Connecticut. She's 26% from 3 now. It was not, 33%. It's not like she was the sharpest sharpshooter, but that's definitely a decline. And I would anticipate that she just, the law of averages even out and that she has a better second half of the year. And that'll really benefit Connecticut if she's able to do that. So she's on my radar as kind of someone that's poised for kind of a hot streak, I think.
And then what are you looking for or excited to see in the next couple of weeks or so between now and the Olympic and All-Star break?
Yeah, I think, obviously this was not a great stretch for them. There was a point where they lost 3 or 4 games. That happens. It's basketball, right? Even the best teams go through skids during a long regular season, especially when you're playing a lead town every night. The question is, how do you respond to that? And to me, if they're able to string together several wins here heading into the break, that's a really good sign that you didn't view a 2-game losing streak or 3 or 4 losses as like demoralizing. What do? We have to change our identity, right? You just get back on track and you do the things that have worked for you as an organization for the last few years. And so winning is, at this point in the year, is not the end all be all, right? Like losses happen. But I think it's a really good sign if you can take a poor stretch and bounce back completely and well. And they have a couple of tough games coming up. I think Minnesota has been maybe the best team in the league, one of the best teams in the league. You know, they'll see them later this week. You have New York coming up. You have 2 New York games coming up in the next few weeks. 2 New York games coming up before the break. So to me, it's like, can you win both of those New York games? Can you win at least one? You don't want to lose both of those games, for example, right? Like that's, you know, at that point, then you're heading into the break 0-3 against the Liberty, and the Liberty is a team probably you're going to have to face. And so I'm looking at some of those more marquee matchups as opportunities for them to instill confidence in themselves. I'm sure that they don't need it, but, you know, to be able to know, you know, this team doesn't have our number. You know, it's just been a couple of less than stellar performances.
Yeah, definitely. And after the game on last Friday, after the Dream game, no one was panicked. You know, there's definitely no sense of panic, and I'm sure you've seen that as well in the Sun. But, you know, we'll have to see, you know, what they do, but they are 15-4. So I think everyone needs to keep that in mind, you know, when you look at the standings. Not too much has changed in the last few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can sense when you're covering a team if the losses start to feel like panic, or people are turning on each other, or they're starting to wonder if, like, is our identity, is our system working? And you can tell when it's like, we're not playing our best and like we'll be better next week, you know. And this Connecticut Sun team definitely falls in that latter category.
Definitely. And, you know, what are you working on now? What should our readers keep an eye out for you?
Yeah, I've been kind of going one by one and profiling some of the players. So I did Carrington earlier in the season. She talked about how football made her a really good defender and playing football growing up. Then talked to Ty Harris, did Burton last week. So I think DeWanna Bonner is someone I haven't done yet. And I think she'll, you know, she's obviously a fascinating, you know, player, because she's almost been playing her best basketball like late into her career. And so that's something that I have in the works. So hopefully it will be available later this week. But yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about the Sun team. I feel like every single player, and this is true for all teams, but every single player has a unique kind of story and personality, and has had a really kind of fascinating journey to get to this point.
Awesome. Well, excited to check that out. And thank you for joining me today, Noa. Where can the listeners find you online?
Yeah, I would say on Twitter or X, Noa Dalzell NBA. I cover the Celtics and the Sun for a number of different sites. And then obviously all my work at the Next is where you can find all my Connecticut Sun coverage.
Awesome. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from me. I'll be talking to Matthew Walter, our fantastic Aces beat reporter, and later in the week to hear from the amazing Gigi Spear and Jackie Powell, as well as our WNBA draft crew on Saturday.